After 4 days away from home, the little girl ran to hug her mother as always, but this time her small body trembled and she whispered, "He did it again." From that statement, seemingly harmless details began to piece together into something very wrong. But there were no tears, no obvious wounds, only silence, and a fear that grew day by day in that seemingly peaceful home. It was drizzling. The rain was like thin silk threads, covering the road with a blurry layer like a fogged-up mirror. Claire pulled her suitcase across the damp stone path. Her thin coat was soaked, and her back was cold and wet. She had been away from home for 4 days. Not too long, but just enough for a familiar feeling to start to bubble in her heart. The desire to hear her child call Mommy, to see Victor holding out his arms to welcome her, and the warm, brightly lit house smelling of baked goods. Claire opened the door. The house was silent. The living room lamp was dimly lit. No smell of baking, no music. Everything was exactly as she had left it. The armchair was tilted at an angle. The vase of white tulips was still full of water. The forgotten note on the table was still there. Victor came out of the kitchen, offering a gentle smile. "You're back." He put his arm around her shoulder, a just enough hug, not too tight. "Everything is fine. You must be exhausted. Get some rest. I'll take care of everything else." Claire nodded, smiling at him. Victor wasn't Emily's biological father. He was her second husband, coming into her and her daughter's lives when Emily was just 3 years old. On paper, he was still her dad. Claire nodded, looking around. "Where's Emily?" He hesitated for a second, as if he didn't quite hear the question. "She's in her room, probably watching cartoons. Let me call her." Without waiting for him to move, Claire called out, "Emmy! Honey, Mommy's home." Silence. A moment later, there was the sound of shuffling footsteps on the wooden floor. Emily appeared in the doorway of her bedroom, clutching Mr. Buttons, her teddy bear with a torn ear. Her eyes were dark-circled, and her skin was pale under the light. Claire paused. She sat down, reaching out her arms. "Come here to Mommy." Emily stopped for a few seconds, then moved forward, one slow step at a time. When she was just a foot away, she stopped, looking up at her mother. Claire hugged her daughter, her hand touching her back, hot and feverish. Emily flinched slightly. "What's wrong, honey?" Claire whispered, gently brushing her hair aside, about to kiss her forehead when she turned her head away. Emily didn't answer. But after a few seconds, when her face was close to her mother's shoulder, she whispered like a breeze, "He did it again." Claire's blood ran cold. She held her breath. Who, honey?" Emily didn't answer. Her eyes glazed over, losing focus. Her small body went limp. "Emmy, what's wrong?" Then Emily slumped completely against Claire. "Mommy!" Her voice faded, then stopped altogether. "Victor!" Claire screamed, holding her daughter tighter. "Call an ambulance." "She has a high fever. Hurry!" Panic pounded in her chest, like a drumbeat. Victor rushed over, frantically scooping Emily out of her arms, running towards the door. Claire barely had time to grab her coat and phone, following him barefoot into the rain. Outside, the rain was falling harder. In the car, Victor sat behind the wheel, his hands shaking slightly as he fastened his daughter's seatbelt. Claire sat beside him, pressing a cold cloth to Emily's forehead, tears welling up in her eyes. "Emmy, can you hear me? Mommy's here." "It's okay, honey." Victor glanced in the rearview mirror. "I don't know when she got sick. She said she had a headache, so I gave her some cold medicine." Claire squeezed her daughter's hand gently, saying nothing. In her head, the sentence from earlier kept repeating itself. "He did it again." It wasn't just a fever. It wasn't just tiredness. Something was wrong. Emily had never said anything like that before. She usually chatted about everything at school, laughing when her mother told her bedtime stories. But today, she didn't hug her mother, didn't smile, just a trembling shadow and that sentence, like a needle scratching lightly across a smooth lake. Claire looked over at Victor. He was staring intently at the road, his mouth pressed into a tight line. For the first time in 4 years of marriage, Claire felt a hazy wall erected between them, something nameless, but quietly cracking. At the hospital, the lights shone brightly. Emily was taken to the emergency room. Claire stood outside, arms wrapped around herself, cold from her palms to her spine. Victor sat beside her, his face buried in his hands, silent. A doctor came out. She has a viral fever, severe dehydration. But the fever has gone down, and she's been given fluids in time. Are you her mother? Claire nodded. Has she said anything strange? Panicked or scared? Claire flinched slightly. Why do you ask? Just a routine question. She's having an unstable psychological reaction. Maybe she's just too tired. Claire didn't answer. In her head, the image of Emily standing in the doorway reappeared. Dark circles under her eyes. The small sentence like the whisper of a small animal, cornered. She went into the room, sitting down beside the bed. Emily was sleeping, her breathing even. Claire gently stroked her hair, her hand trembling slightly. She leaned down to whisper, as if afraid to awaken something lurking in her daughter's sleep. Honey, who is he? The white light in the hospital room cast a dusty haze over everything. The air was heavy and still, only the beeping of the heart monitor flashing rhythmically like the ticking of a clock, counting each endless second. Claire sat on the edge of the bed, her eyes never leaving her daughter's face. Emily was sleeping deeply, breathing raspily, her thin hand revealing pale blue veins. She gently pulled the blanket up, brushing a stray hair from her forehead. Her hand was warm, but couldn't reach the dream that was holding Emily captive in some distant place that her mother couldn't reach. Victor stood near the window, his hands in his pockets, his shoulders slightly hunched. His shadow stretched long on the cold tiled floor. Tonight, there was no more rain. Only a thick silence in the 3-person room where each person seemed to be in their own world. A gentle knock at the door. The on-duty doctor came in, his voice quiet. We have preliminary results. She has mild pneumonia, but the worrying thing is her weakness, physical and mental. Her body is exhausted due to prolonged poor eating, and there are signs of stress. We need to monitor her further, especially psychologically. Victor nodded. She's always been sensitive. Lately, Claire's been away on long business trips. I guess she misses her mother. Claire turned. You said stress. Yeah, Victor nodded, walking closer to the bed, placing his hand on his daughter's shoulder. She hasn't been eating much, or she's irritable, and then silent. I guess I'm not as good at comforting her as you are. Emily twitched slightly. When Victor leaned closer, she tilted her head, turning her face to the wall, quietly but decisively. Claire noticed. She said nothing. Victor kept his voice steady, his eyes tinged with regret. She hasn't been talking much these days. She's been good during the day, studying in the morning, playing with her teddy bear, and coloring in the afternoon. I even made chocolate cake. She ate 2 slices. Claire looked at Emily's hand. In the light, she could clearly see faint, long marks from her wrist to her elbow, like the traces of a pen, pressed hard, multiple layers overlapping. Not marks from coloring. She touched it, gently. She played all afternoon? Victor didn't hesitate. Yeah. Sometimes she even goes out to the backyard to draw on the tiles with chalk. Maybe because she sat studying for too long before that. Her hand got marked with ink. Claire nodded, but her eyes didn't leave the small hand. She leaned down, bringing her nose close to Emily's collar. There was no scent of the usual baby bath soap, but a faint smell of antiseptic, cold and unfamiliar. A type of smell often found in rooms that have been cleaned too thoroughly. The on-duty nurse brought in the medicine. When Victor stepped forward, about to help Emily sit up, she blinked and quickly turned her face into the pillow. Her small hand gripped Mr. Buttons tightly. The nurse looked, pausing for a second. Does she usually avoid her dad? Victor smiled. Not usually. She's probably just too tired today. Claire caught the nurse's fleeting glance before she turned away. No suspicion, no accusation, just a look like someone who had seen too many unspoken things. As the clock turned to 2 a.m., Emily stirred, whimpering softly. Claire jumped up, sitting close beside her, pressing her hand to her cheek. The fever had subsided, but her closed eyes still twitched slightly, as if running away from something in her dream. Then she heard, "Sorry. I did wrong. I'll study more. Don't lock the door anymore. Mommy, don't leave me." The last sentence wasn't clear. Maybe it was Mommy. Maybe it was someone else. But the voice trembled, broken, like a young bird that had been caged for too long, unable to fly. Claire sat up, straight. She tried not to let the tears well up, tried to keep her breath steady. But a pain surged up, not from the words, but from the way Emily curled up, her hands clasped together as if waiting to be punished. Victor sat in the opposite chair, opening his coffee cup and asking softly, "Did you hear what she said? She was talking in her sleep." "It's nothing," he sighed. "Kids watch too much stuff on YouTube these days. They probably hear nonsense and bring it into their dreams." Claire was silent. Then she asked quietly, "Did you take her anywhere in the last 4 days?" Victor shook his head. "Number just around the house. It's been raining. She doesn't like going out." Claire nodded slowly, her eyes stopping on Emily's backpack, placed in the corner of the room. A small stuffed rabbit was hooked onto the zipper, and it was hanging upside down. A small detail. But Emily had always arranged things very neatly. Everything was facing outwards, the hooks always straight. So who had touched it? Around dawn, as the lights outside the hallway dimmed with the last shift, Victor went out to get coffee. Claire sat back in the room, her eyes looking out the glass door. The city was still asleep, but inside her, everything had awakened. The question, "He did it again," still had no answer. Claire didn't want to believe it, but she knew a mother's feeling wasn't easy to fool. Beneath the warm facade that Victor created, something was shifting, like a crack in the wall, not yet clear, but already hearing the wind whistling through. Claire sat on the edge of the sofa in the living room, holding a steaming cup of tea. The delicate jasmine scent spread out, but not enough to dispel the oppressive atmosphere that had clung to her chest since morning. Emily was sleeping on the armchair, clutching Mr. Buttons to her chest. She was sleeping lightly, curled up like a kitten in a fleece blanket. Her left wrist was exposed from the edge of her pajamas. Claire could clearly see the faint swelling on the soft skin. The doctor had discharged her. "She needs to rest for a few days, avoid psychological stimulation," he said. "If there are signs of prolonged fear, you should take her to a specialist." Victor volunteered to clean Emily's room, make the bed with new sheets, and bought more teddy bears. He had been baking cookies all morning. He always spoke softly, walked quietly, opened the door without making a sound. But Claire realized it was that gentleness that made her uneasy, not a loud voice, not a scolding as if everything was carefully calculated not to leave. Traces. "I'm going to the market for a bit," Victor said, taking his keys. "You rest a bit. I'll buy salmon to make porridge for her." "Thank you." Claire smiled, a smile as faint as morning dew touching glass. As the sound of the car engine faded, she stood up, walking towards Emily. Her small hand was still clutching Mr. Button's. Claire leaned down, very gently, turning her daughter's hand over. The swelling was clearer in the light. Not bruised, not torn, but swollen, as if something had been wrapped tightly around it long enough to cause pain, then removed just in time before leaving a bruise. She inhaled, gently, reaching out to stroke her hair. Emily flinched, opening her eyes round and blank, then immediately turning her body to face the back of the chair. Not a word. "Emmy." Claire sat down beside her. "What happened to your hand?" Emily didn't answer. She held her breath. Claire could hear it clearly, as if she was afraid that just one word would break something. "Honey, did someone hurt you?" Claire asked again, slowly, her eyes never leaving her daughter's neck. After a long time, Emily turned her head. Her eyes looked straight at her mother, not crying, not scared, just silent. A pleading, weary look, as if she wanted to say a lot, but didn't dare to open her mouth. Then she quietly turned her face away, pulling the blanket high up to her ears. Claire didn't ask any more. She sat there for a while, then stood up and went towards her bedroom. In the afternoon, when Victor came home, he brought a bag full of vegetables, fish, fresh milk, and chocolate chips. He talked more than usual, boasting about the promotional sale at the store, asking Claire what she wanted to eat tonight. Emily sat at the dining table, playing with her spoon. When Victor placed the bowl of porridge in front of her, she flinched slightly. Claire saw it clearly, just a small movement. But a mother's instinct couldn't be mistaken. "Eat a little." "There's salmon today," Victor said, his voice as sweet as honey. He handed her a tissue to wipe her mouth, but her hand recoiled as if touching electricity. Even so, Victor didn't show anything. He was still gentle, smiling, taking the tissue back and turning to Claire. "I think she's better today." Claire nodded slightly, not answering. She focused on every detail: her daughter's eyes, her breathing, the way she squeezed her fingers around the spoon, her eyes secretly watching the door, as if afraid someone would suddenly walk in. That night, when Victor was sound asleep, Claire went into Emily's room with a warm glass of milk. The room was tidy, smelling of new soap. She gently placed the glass down, sitting beside the bed. "Emmy," she called softly, "if there's anything that scares you, tell Mommy. I'm here." Emily didn't open her eyes, but pursed her lips. Her hand pulled deeper into the blanket. Claire leaned down, touching the mark on her wrist. It wasn't red anymore, but still slightly swollen. She didn't ask anything more. This time, she just sat there for a long time, until Emily fell asleep. The next day, Claire tried walking along the neighborhood. She talked to Mrs. Taylor, who had lived next door for over 6 years. "Claire? Oh, I heard about the little one's fever. So pitiful," she said while watering her plants. "Mr. Victor takes great care of her. I even saw him bringing the teddy bears out to sunbathe every morning. So thoughtful." Claire smiled, then went to Mr. Charles' house, a retired veteran, who often sat on the porch reading the newspaper. "Victor?" Very polite. He even helped me when my bike chain came off the other day. "Your little girl is pampered like an egg. I even saw him buying ice cream for her every afternoon." The compliments were like a glossy paint covering a flat wall. No one saw anything. No one suspected anything. Claire thanked them, but her heart felt heavier. She knew Victor was well loved, always on time, always kind, always making others feel safe. That was what worried her the most. Late in the afternoon, Claire stood in the laundry room. She found a grey rubber band in Emily's old jacket pocket, the type usually used to bundle documents, or tie things tightly. One end of the band was slightly worn, showing signs of being stretched strongly. Claire picked it up, turning it slightly. It fit perfectly with the circumference of her daughter's wrist. She looked at the rubber band, looked at the window, then looked at herself in the small mirror on the wall. Perhaps no one would believe her if she said what she was thinking. Perhaps there was no evidence. No blood, no screaming, no clear traces. Only a child afraid, in silence. Only a mother, slowly learning to believe in that silence. Claire poured warm water into a white porcelain cup, her hand keeping it still and quiet. The kitchen was minimalist, clean, with no sound other than the crackling of the hot water just poured. The wall clock read 9:15 p.m. She had just placed the cup on the table when she heard small footsteps slowly coming from the other room. Emily. She walked past the kitchen door carrying her math notebook, her eyes not meeting her mother's. Her back was hunched over, her feet not hitting the tiled floor hard, but just gliding lightly, as if afraid the sound would make someone angry. Claire watched her until she disappeared into the small study near the stairs. She said nothing, nor did she follow. She stood still, quietly, and began to observe like the habit of those who are learning to trust their instincts instead of explanations. For the past 2 days, Claire had taken time off work to take care of her daughter. She said that to the company, to the neighbors, and even to Victor. But in her heart, she knew clearly. It wasn't just to take care of her daughter, but to keep Emily in sight and keep the truth within reach. She walked very quietly to the study. The door was only ajar, leaving a small crack just enough to look in. Emily sat at the table under the yellow light. Her left hand supported her forehead, her right hand trembling slightly as she wrote. Her collar drooped, revealing a faint scratch on the back of her neck. Claire paused. On the page, the math was slanted, the lines pressed heavily, as if written with the full force of her hand. There were calculations crossed out, then rewritten, then crossed out again. A crumpled piece of notebook paper lay on the edge of the table. Emily's lips were pursed, sometimes tensing up as if swallowing something stuck in her throat. Claire retreated, returning to the kitchen. A moment later, when Emily left for the living room to watch cartoons, she went into the study. In the small trash can next to the table were 3 or 4 crumpled worksheets. One sheet was still half open. Claire picked it up. The letters were large and jagged, with ink smudged in places as if it had been wet. She brought the paper close, sniffing it. Not water. Tears. At the very bottom was a line crossed out strongly. I won't do wrong again. I'll study until it's right. Claire gripped the paper, pressing it down on the table. Her fingers trembled slightly. Then she put it back in its place, as if she had never touched it. Late at night, Victor was asleep. Emily had also been lulled to sleep by Claire with a gentle story, and she fell into a very deep sleep, or very still. Claire went into the study. In the desk drawer was the old phone, used exclusively for the security camera system, the camera system that had been installed since Emily was in kindergarten, after an old theft. Victor didn't care about it. There was no password. She opened the app, entered the code. The interface appeared slowly, but clearly. Each black and white frame from the cameras around the house, the front door, the hallway, the staircase, the corner of the living room, and especially Emily's bedroom. Claire quickly scrolled through recent clips. There was almost nothing. She selected a date 3 nights ago, the time when Emily had a fever, and Victor stayed up all night taking care of her. Around 11:10 p.m., the frame of Emily's room lit up. She sat on the bed, not crying, not moving much, just sitting still, curled up in the corner. The door opened. Victor came in, tall and thin, wearing pajamas, holding a glass of water. He sat down beside her. The camera was placed high, in the corner, so it only filmed from behind. Victor didn't do anything obvious. No sound, no criminal behavior. Only the yellow light cast down on his face for a few seconds. His eyes were cold, without any tenderness like during the day. Then he stood up, left the room without looking back. Emily still sat exactly like that until 11:40 p.m. before lying down. Claire watched that clip over and over 3 times. No action, no screams. But that silence, the way Victor went in, sat down, looked at her without saying anything, made her skin crawl. He didn't comfort her, didn't put a pillow, didn't tell a story, just present, like a sentence hanging suspended in space. The next morning, as Emily was colouring in the living room, Claire walked over, gently sitting down beside her. "Did you sleep well last night?" she asked, as if casually. Emily nodded, not looking at her mother. "Did anyone come into your room?" A slight pause. Emily held her pen, her head down on the drawing. "No, Mommy's dreaming." Her voice was like a stretched thread. Claire was silent. She gently placed her hand on her daughter's shoulder, squeezing lightly, not asking anything more. That night, Claire took the old camera from storage to clean it. She planned to install another one, this time in a hidden corner in Emily's room, where the old camera couldn't reach. No one knew. No one needed to know. She began to believe in her intuition, no longer just a feeling, but small, disjointed pieces, nameless, without blood, without traces, but cutting into a mother's heart like slow scratches. Emily didn't scream, didn't accuse, but every gesture, glance, word, reaction was screaming in silence. And Claire understood that not everyone heard those cries, except a mother. The weekend morning. The weather was clear. The sky was like a clean glass, reflecting the gentle early-season sunlight. Claire tied up the trash bag, opened the back door, and walked slowly towards the shared container placed next to the fence. A light wind, the smell of fresh grass mixed with the smell of old dry leaves, soothed some of the nameless fatigue in her heart. As she was opening the lid of the container, there was the sound of shuffling slippers from the fence on the left. Claire looked up. Mrs. Daniels, a neighbor who had lived alone for over a decade, was watering some geranium pots. "Hello," Claire spoke first, politely. Mrs. Daniels looked over, nodded slightly, then said, as if thinking aloud, "Is the little one better? I saw her sitting reading a book yesterday through the window." "Yes, she's better. Thank you." She was silent for a moment, then added very slowly, "Last week, Tuesday night, I think, I heard her crying so hard." Claire froze. Her heart compressed, but her face remained calm. "Are you sure it was Tuesday night?" "Yeah, I stayed up late that night. My window was open. The crying echoed over weak, but very clear, like being choked." She paused for a beat, her voice dry. "It's not the first time, but every morning I see her going to school, wearing her uniform neatly, so I didn't ask." Claire nodded, trying not to let her eyes tremble. "Thank you." "It's nothing. I don't interfere in other people's business." Her voice was as light as paper touching paper. "It's just, there are some sounds that shouldn't be made in the middle of the night, especially from a child's mouth." Claire went back into the house, each step like stepping on broken tiles. Tuesday night, it was the day she was still in another city. Emily had a fever the next day. There was no more time matching. It wasn't a coincidence. For the first time, her suspicion was no longer a feeling, but a fact with a witness. That night, after feeding Emily, Claire folded her toys, took a children's picture book, and sat beside her bed. The nightlight was lightly yellow, the shadows hanging vaguely swaying back and forth with the fan. What story should we read today, honey? I like The Fox from Before. Claire read, slowly, pausing rhythmically, but her eyes occasionally glanced at her daughter's wrist. The swelling had almost disappeared, but the way Emily kept her hand under the blanket was still stiff, as if it didn't belong to her body. After reading, Claire kissed her forehead, tucked her back into bed and stood up, walking into the hallway. As she passed the bathroom door, she heard water, not strong, but steady. She stopped, then opened the door slightly. Emily stood by the sink, wearing pajamas. She didn't notice her mother. Her hands were scrubbing each other, water wetting the hem of her shirt. Her face was down. Her wrist was red. Claire came in, softly. "Emmy?" Emily froze. Her hands stiffened in midair, but still didn't look up. "What are you doing, honey?" "I'm washing my hands," she said softly, like a whisper. "It's late now. Why aren't you sleeping?" Emily looked up, her eyes like a thick glass empty, cold and unfamiliar. "He said I was dirty. Very dirty. I have to wash." The words made Claire feel like she had been slashed across the heart. She walked over, kneeling down, hugging her. Water from her hands wet her mother's shoulder. Emily didn't cry, didn't struggle, just stood still like a statue. Claire put her hand on the back of her neck, pressing her cheek to her hair, the smell of strong soap and meaningless. "You're not dirty, Emily. No one has the right to say that to you. Never." A second later, her small body began to tremble, not out loud, but trembling like a young bird that had been rained on for too long. Claire turned off the tap, took a towel to dry her hands, then carried her back to her room, put her on the bed, pulled the blanket up to her chin. Emily didn't say anything more, but before closing her eyes, she whispered, "Mommy, don't make him angry anymore." Claire stayed up all night that night, sitting in the chair beside the bed, her eyes open, but not seeing anything. She didn't cry. She was calculating. The next morning, Claire reopened the camera clip from last night. There was no camera in the bathroom, but the camera outside the hallway had recorded a detail. Exactly at 11:05 p.m., Emily opened the door, walked out of the room alone, went into the bathroom, and exactly 15 seconds later, Victor opened the door of the master bedroom, stuck his head out, and looked after her. He didn't go out, didn't call, just looked, then closed the door. That was all. But Claire understood. He knew, and he let it happen. That afternoon, Claire sat writing a small note. Not a diary, not a confession, just a list. Mrs. Daniels confirmed the crying on Tuesday night. Swelling on the left wrist, suspected tightening. Camera, 11 p.m. Emily goes to WC. Victor follows. Abnormal hand-washing behavior, signs of obsessive-compulsive cleanliness. Emily says, "He said I was dirty." Claire put down the pen. Her hand was a little cold, but in her heart, something had warmed up, not hope, but will, the will to protect. She looked out the window. The sky was still blue. But this time, Claire knew clearly. The wind could change direction at any time. And when that happened, she wouldn't stand still. Monday lunchtime. The weather was still, neither hot nor cool. The trees in front of the elementary school were silent, casting even shadows on the grey tiled ground. Claire parked in the lot behind, walked into the administrative office with a brief reason. "I'd like to speak privately with Emily's homeroom teacher, if possible." She was led to a small meeting room with light air conditioning, a wooden tea table, and closed curtains. A few minutes later, the homeroom teacher came in. A woman in her 30s, small in stature, her hair pulled high, her face kind but somewhat tired. She offered a polite smile. "Hello, Claire. I'm Miss Helen." Claire squeezed her fingers together, trying to keep her voice calm. I'm sorry for stopping by so suddenly. I just wanted to ask, lately, has Emily changed anything in class? Is there anything that worries you? Miss Helen hesitated slightly. Well, Emily is a very well-behaved child. Very quiet, too, but it's because of that. I've noticed a few strange things lately. Specifically, she often asks to go to the bathroom once every lesson, sometimes even twice. When I ask if she has a stomachache or is uncomfortable, she just shakes her head. Miss Helen looked down at her palm, then looked up. Once, I went to check the bathroom, and Emily was standing in the stall, not doing anything at all. Her eyes were red. I asked, and she said, because I haven't finished studying yet. I'm making Mum sad. Claire took a deep breath. What do you think about that statement? I'm not sure. Children often put pressure on themselves because they want to make adults happy. But I have a feeling. She wasn't talking about studying at school. Claire didn't answer immediately. In her heart, it felt like a hand was squeezing tightly. After leaving Miss Helen's room, Claire didn't go home right away. She stood hidden in the hallway leading to the playground where the children were running around. The bell was about to ring to go to class. She was about to turn away when a small voice rang out. Miss, are you Emily's mother? Claire turned. A little girl with braided hair, wearing a slightly disheveled uniform, was looking up at her. Yes. Are you? Lucy. I play with Emily in class. Claire sat down at eye level, offering a gentle smile. I'm very happy to meet you. Lucy pursed her lips, then whispered, Emily is sad these days. She said, she's probably being punished. Punished for what? She said she has to stand and read the times tables 100 times at home, read out loud, and not be able to sit and study if she does wrong. Claire kept her expression neutral. Do you know what times tables? Lucy nodded. Then the bell rang. She ran away, without looking back. Claire stood up, but her heart was heavy, as if she had just heard a short indictment. When she got home, Claire waited for Victor to go out. He said he was going to get a prescription for his mother, a very good excuse, as usual. Emily was lying reading a story in the living room. She didn't know her mother went upstairs. Emily's room was bright, tidy. There was nothing strange on the surface, but Claire opened the door of the small bookshelf, where a plastic learning board was hanging, the kind children use to practice writing. On the board, the marker had dried up, but could still be read. I must be good. I must be well behaved. I must not make Mom sad. I must not talk outside of the lesson. I must remember the lesson. I must not say wrong. I must not say wrong. I must not say wrong. The last sentence was repeated 3 times, the letters bold, the pen pressed so hard that the board was dented. Claire sat down, her hand clenched into a fist. The words were like knives, cutting not only into Emily, but into herself. Victor never shouted, never hit. He just programmed her like a machine. That night, Claire hugged her to sleep, letting her lie in her arms like when she was 3 years old. Emily fell asleep quickly, as usual, but her breathing was broken, her chest heaving, as if being forced to stabilize. Claire took her phone, pulled the blanket up to cover her shoulders, then opened the browser. Her fingers typed each word. What are the symptoms of a child being mentally abused? The results page appeared. Eating and sleeping disorders, avoidance of physical contact, excessive stress when doing wrong, self-blame, repeating negative language patterns, tendency to isolate, not share. She crossed off each line against Emily. Each line appeared like a silent confirmation. She switched to the section Behavioral Control of Children, under the guise of education and saw examples. Making children study repeatedly as punishment, assigning moral blame for incorrect knowledge, forcing children to self-monitor and report errors, not allowing children to play or imagine. Claire looked over at the study table. Mr. Buttons lay quietly in a corner, no longer being hugged. The scribbled drawings that Emily had shown her mother were also gone from the wall. The wall was white, clean, and empty. Victor had erased the imagination from her, not with whips, but with repeated words, eyes, and silence. She put the phone down, closing her eyes, not crying, but her whole body began to tense up like a bowstring pulled to its fullest extent. Victor wasn't just hurting her child. He was stealing Emily's childhood every hour, every line of text. The next morning, Claire went into the study. She took paper, writing a line. Emily Protection Plan, Phase 1. She typed the name of a free legal advice center. Then, a support center for children with psychological trauma. Then, saved the schedule, camera, notes. The evidence was still vague, but Victor's mask had begun to crack, and Claire would be the one to peel it off layer by layer. It poured rain, suddenly, at noon. The sound of water hitting the roof tiles was like a warning. Claire parked the car 2 houses away from home, turned off the engine, did not turn on the lights. She wore a wide coat, pulled the hood tightly over her head, her hand holding tightly to the phone with a night vision camera with an additional super small lens. The machine was recording. The flashlight was off. The memory was empty. She had prepared 3 days before waiting for the right time. She had informed Victor that morning. "I have a meeting in the town centre. I won't be back until the afternoon." He nodded, without suspicion. Emily didn't know either. She just said a soft hello to her mother, her eyes absent. Claire slipped into the auxiliary door through the kitchen. This door was rarely used. The lock still had oil. There was no sound. The smell of freshly brewed coffee wafted out from the kitchen, mixed with the smell of printing paper from the photocopy machine in the study. She walked very lightly, sneaking into the old storage room. It was a small, dark, cramped store next to the study. Between the 2 rooms there was a wooden door crack that had cracked over time, just enough to put the camera lens close, capturing almost the entire table surface. Claire placed the phone on the shelf, adjusting the lens slightly. The display showed the first movement, Victor's hand placing the notebook on the table. Red pen, a stack of A4 paper. Emily was sitting, bowing her head, her back curled up. There was no sound, but the lip movements, facial expressions, gestures, all were clearer than any story. Victor stood, leaning, one hand on his hip, the other pointing to the workbook. His face wasn't angry, not shouting, just the coldness of someone training a puppet. His eyes were wide, but didn't show emotion, just empty. Emily trembled as she held the pen, her handwriting distorted on the white page. Victor pulled the paper back, bringing it close to his eyes, then dropping it on the table with a disgusted gesture. His lips moved, saying a long sentence. Claire couldn't hear clearly, but his lips ended with one word. She could read it: ashamed. Emily closed her eyes, whispering softly. Her lips moved. "I'm sleepy." Victor snatched her hand, pulling her to her feet. Then, without waiting for her reaction, he pushed Emily back down into the chair, his hand holding tightly to her shoulders, his face leaning close. Claire clenched her fist. She didn't wait any longer. The storage door burst open. She came out, her voice echoing straight into the space like a lightning bolt tearing the sky. "Don't touch her again!" Victor spun around. His face paled with surprise. His eyes widened, his hand releasing instinctively. Emily slipped out of the chair, backing close to the wall, her hands over her head. Claire entered the room, raising the phone that was recording with the light on. "I've recorded everything from beginning to end. It's enough, Victor. He straightened up, smiling faintly. You're seriously misunderstanding. Really? Claire replied, her voice not trembling at all. Misunderstanding is when she asks to sleep, and you pull her hand. Misunderstanding is when you teach her, with eyes like interrogating a prisoner. Victor looked at the phone in her hand, then looked at Emily, trembling in the corner. His voice deepened, for the first time, with a wobble. You're messing up a simple child-rearing matter. She hasn't finished studying, You're forcing her, Claire interrupted. You're controlling her, with words, with looks, with your cruel silence. Victor took a step forward, his eyes darkening. Do you know you're ruining this whole family for a bit of ridiculous suspicion? Claire didn't back down. I'm saving this family from you. She turned to Emily, her voice soft but clear. Come here to Mommy, honey. She stood up very slowly, looking at Victor one last time before running straight into her mother's arms. Claire wrapped her arms around her, her head buried in her chest. She took another phone from her coat pocket, dialed. I need to report a case of child abuse at a private residence with video evidence. Victor took another step. You're playing with the law. No. Claire turned, her eyes flashing. I'm using the law. After all you've done, this is the fairest thing I can choose. Silence lasted for a few seconds. Rain was still falling outside the porch, but in the room, the cold came from Victor's eyes, the eyes of someone who once believed they would never be discovered. He turned, walking quickly out of the room, slamming the door hard, making the walls shake. Emily was panting in her mother's arms. Claire kissed her forehead, her hand holding tightly to the phone that was still recording. The light from the small screen reflected on her cheek, making one thing clear. From today, she would no longer be silent. The preliminary hearing room of the local family court was located in an old 3-story building, the front painted grey, the thick walls almost completely soundproof. The atmosphere inside carried a characteristic solemnity, quiet, but not exactly peaceful. Claire sat in the second row of seats, her hand clutching the file bag. Beside her was her lawyer, an older woman, standing straight, and her voice not needing to be loud to make people hear every word clearly. On the opposite side, Victor sat neatly in a grey suit, his face without expression. His eyes were cold and alert, not the look of someone who was weak. To Victor's left was the defense attorney. Behind them was a representative of the Child Protection Services, a psychologist specializing in treating trauma for adolescents who had just assessed Emily in the mandatory consultation the day before. The court was not crowded, but everyone held their breath. Claire wasn't leaning back. She was balancing with her whole body, as if just letting go for a beat would make everything fall. A soft bell rang. The door of the room opened. The judge, an old man with grey hair, a deep voice and eyes tired from judging hundreds of cases like this, came in. The hearing on the case related to the custody of the minor Emily W. and the allegation of mental abuse of a child against the defendant, Mr. Victor W., is beginning. Claire's lawyer stood up first. She presented briefly, then asked permission to submit the evidence documents. Video clip recorded on the 19th of this month from a legal hidden corner in the house, recording the defendant's act of forcing the child to do homework in a tired state, with physical contact that was threatening. Images of Emily's learning board, workbook, recording repeated lines that showed brainwashing, psychological coercion. Report from the psychologist, confirming that Emily's expressions showed elements of post-traumatic stress, PTSD, including fear of repeated mistakes, avoidance of contact, breathing disorders when facing adults with commanding voices. Reports from the homeroom teacher and classmates matching the timing and abnormal behavior at school. The judge received it, nodding. Please, invite the doctor." The doctor stood up, her voice light but clear. "Emily has no injuries on her skin, but she shows signs of mental exhaustion. Avoidance responses, self-blame, and silence in the face of authority are typical of a child who has been subjected to prolonged mental abuse. No need for whips, just the right look, the right word, enough to paralyze her self-defense." The Victor side didn't react. He sat motionless, his hands clasped together. The defense attorney stood up at this time. "Your Honor, my client, although only a stepfather, is a devoted father. He admits to being strict, but it is training without malice. In today's society, directing children into discipline cannot be misunderstood as abuse." Victor also spoke at this time, softly, but not hiding contempt. "She's weak, I just want her to be stronger. I don't hit, I don't scold. I set limits. I teach her how to be silent and think. Isn't that better than pampering or letting her grow up to be an unstable child?" Claire stood up, almost losing control. "You say you love her, but why when she dreams she says, 'Please don't lock the door anymore'? Why doesn't a 6-year-old dare to say a wrong word? Why doesn't her learning board have drawings? No scribbles, only hundreds of lines. 'I am not allowed to talk outside of the lesson.'" Victor clenched his hands. "I just guided her." "How did you guide her?" She stepped closer, pulling out a printed image taken from the camera. Victor was standing close to Emily, his hand gripping her shoulder. "As a father," she said, her voice stern, "if you love her, why is she more afraid of you than the darkness?" No one in the room could answer that question. After 3 hours of debate, consideration, and argument from the parties, the judge read the conclusion. The jury finds that the defendant's actions, although not leaving physical traces, have seriously damaged the psychology of the minor Emily W., as evidenced by video, learning materials, and assessments from experts. The court declares depriving Mr. Victor W. of all custody and contact rights with Emily W., imposing a penalty of 18 months of suspended sentence on Mr. Victor W. for the act of mental abuse of a child, requiring the defendant to participate in a mandatory behavioral control treatment course for 12 months. Emily W. is placed under the full guardianship of her mother, Ms. Claire M., and is supported psychologically continuously by an independent professional. Claire didn't shed tears when she heard the verdict. She just turned to the representative of the welfare department, nodding very lightly. On the other side, Victor didn't argue. He just silently watched Claire leave, with Emily holding her mother's hand tightly. The courthouse gate opened to welcome the afternoon sun. The rain had stopped. The road was still wet, but the air was clear. Claire and Emily stood waiting for the car. She leaned against her mother, her small hand squeezing her mother's fingers until they turned white. Not saying anything. No need to say anything. For the first time in weeks, Claire leaned down, whispering in her ear, "I saw it. I saw it. And I won't let anyone hurt you anymore." Emily looked up. A faint smile flashed across Fragile, like a butterfly just out of its cocoon. The apartment was located on the 3rd floor of an old building on the edge of town. The small balcony overlooked a park with low trees, leaves falling on the tiled walkways. Claire chose this place not for convenience, but because the walls were thick, the light was good, and there weren't too many people passing by too close. A place enough to start over, not many questions, not too much sound, especially for a child who still hasn't really slept peacefully. Emily never complained, but on the first night, Claire woke up at 2 a.m., finding that she wasn't in bed. She was sitting by the window, clutching Mr. Buttons tightly now, worn on the right ear. Her eyes looked out into the dim courtyard, where only a lonely yellow lamp shone down on the electric pole. Claire didn't call. She just came over, kneeling down beside her, touching her hand lightly. Emily didn't flinch. She turned to her mother, taking a deep breath, not afraid, not saying anything, just exhaling like a wind that had been held in her chest for too long. "I'm waiting for morning," Emily whispered. "It's safer in the morning." "Why do you think so?" "Because the evening is when people are angry." Claire didn't ask any more. She carried her back to bed. No lullabies, no comfort, just the presence. And that, for a child, is sometimes enough. The next day, Claire took her to her first therapy session at the Children's Psychological Center. The therapy room looked like a miniature kindergarten: drawing tables, crayons, small chairs, soft rugs, warm yellow light. On the wall were some old paintings by children who had been treated: houses, trees, suns, and people hugging each other. Dr. Anna, a woman with short grey hair, wearing thin-rimmed glasses, didn't ask many questions. She sat down beside Emily, quietly offering crayons. "Can we draw together?" The first time, Emily only drew the sun, a large circle layered on top of each other. A few sessions later, there were more trees, then a tree with a bird's nest, and then the figure of Mom, a small person, standing next to the sun, wearing a hat. "Is this your mum?" the doctor asked. Emily nodded, then added a very small detail, drawing the mother's hand reaching out, wrapping around the head of the smaller figure. Claire looked at that picture all night. Not because it was beautiful, but because this was the first time Emily had put someone in the safe world she had created, and was the first time drawing an arm hug. On weekend afternoons, the two went shopping for the apartment. Claire let her choose each spoon, house slippers, and even a tablecloth. "Should you choose a striped or floral tablecloth?" "Which one doesn't get dirty quickly, Mom?" Emily replied, then blushed. "Oh, I was just kidding." Claire paused for a second, because it was the first joke she had heard Emily say in over a month. When they went to the curtain shop, Claire asked, "What color do you like for your bedroom?" Emily was silent for a moment. Then she pointed to a light yellow fabric with tiny, small flowers. "This one. It's like early morning, like a place without darkness." Claire nodded, ordering it right away. On the day of installing the curtains, she let Emily climb onto the chair with her mother. She smiled lightly, not out loud, but enough for Claire to hear the sound ringing in her heart. One evening, Claire was folding blankets when she saw Emily standing by the bed, holding a comic book, her eyes sparkling. "I'm hungry," she said softly. "What do you want to eat?" "A sandwich with peanut butter and banana like Mom made the other day." Claire smiled. "Coming right up." 10 minutes later, when she returned with a plate of halved sandwiches, she found Emily sitting waiting, her back straight, her eyes bright. She said, "I'm going to eat 1.5 today." Claire pretended to be serious. "This girl eats a lot. I'm not afraid of being punished if I eat a lot anymore." Claire didn't say anything, but she sat down, reaching out to rub her back, her heart warming little by little. That night, when it got windy, Claire was tidying up the room when she heard small footsteps walking into the hallway. Emily stood outside the door, holding the corner of the blanket, whispering, "Mum, can you turn off the lights for me?" "Yeah." Claire came in, pulling the curtains. When the room was plunged into darkness, with only the blurry yellow lights outside the window, Emily climbed into bed, lying obediently. "I'm not scared anymore. Mum's here." Claire came closer, leaning down to hug her, their heads pillowed together like two blankets close together in the cold night. "Should I tell you a story?" she asked softly. Emily nodded. Claire whispered a song, the one her mother used to sing to her, on the nights she was 6 years old and afraid of the dark, like her now. "The sky will be blue again, because you have Mom sitting here forever. You just need to breathe evenly and softly. Close your eyes. Mum is still here." Emily fell asleep when the song reached the end. Her hand was still holding her mother's hand. Claire lay still, looking at her face. For the first time in weeks, seeing this sleep was whole. The next day, Claire took Emily to the park near the house. She walked in small steps, still cautious. But when she saw the neighbor's white cat lying under the tree, Emily laughed out loud. "Mum, it's like a pillow." Claire sat down beside her, smiling. "Do you want to name it?" Snowflake." Claire didn't say anything more, but inside something broke, light and clear. That night, Claire wrote in her notebook, "Emily ate a whole portion of porridge today, smiled when drawing, called the cat by name, and said, 'Mom's here. No more nightmares. No more hands squeezing her shoulders.'" She closed the notebook, turned off the lights. Through the new curtain, the street lights filtered in gently. No more light that was too harsh, nor pitch black. Just enough for a child to sleep peacefully. The weekend. The sun was gentle. Spring had spread a thin layer of green over the trees around the small square where the local children's book fair had just set up a row of white tents, dotted with string flags and children's laughter. Claire stood behind the 6th booth, where a sign was attached, "Weekend Story Time with the Author." She wore a light-colored shirt, her hair tied neatly, her hand holding a short collection of prints, her voice even and warm. In front of her were about a dozen children, sitting cross-legged on the carpet, holding pillows or teddy bears, their eyes sparkling with curiosity. Emily sat in the front row. She was holding a bookmark with a picture of the sun. Claire caught her eye, and both nodded slightly, without words, without command, but completely empathetic. "Once upon a time," Claire began, "there was a little girl who thought her words were too small for anyone to hear, until her mother sat down beside her and said, 'I'm still here.' From then on, the little girl began to tell everything, even the smallest things." A boy laughed. A girl whispered to her friend, "It's like Emily." Claire smiled slightly, turning to the next page. Finishing the story, she was rearranging the manuscript when a young woman approached. She wore a long beige dress, a fabric bag on her shoulder, her face pale, but her eyes contained an unusual determination. "Are you Claire M., the one who wrote the article, 'Children Need to Be Heard,' on the blog Quietly Mothering?" Claire nodded. "It's me." The woman was a little choked up. "I read it 3 times. Thank you for writing. I think my son is being slightly abused by my ex-husband. But I always told myself I was overthinking it, until I read your article." She stopped, her eyes filled with tears. Claire stepped forward, not saying, just squeezing her shoulder lightly. Not a promise, nor advice. Just simply, "I understand." 6 months had passed since the day the court closed. Emily now studied at a small elementary school, 10 minutes walk from home. She no longer sat close to the wall in class, no longer asked to go out 5 times each lesson. She had a friend named Linda, a girl with short hair who told silly ghost stories and dared to argue with the teacher when she didn't agree. Linda said, "I should try to be class president," Emily said the other day. "But I said to let it be for next time. This year, I just want to play with cats more." Claire laughed. "That's being the leader of the group, too." Emily was still quiet, but no longer afraid to speak. When she accidentally spilled water during meals, she said, "Sorry," then wiped it herself, not crying, not trembling. And for the first time, she began to write short stories, the main character always being a cat named Snowflake, exploring the world. Claire also went back to writing, not thrilling or suspenseful stories like before, but slow notes, seemingly invisible stories, her daughter's whisper when sleeping, the way she sat straight when reading, or just the fact that she dared to ask for another cake without asking her mother 3 times. The article, "Children Need to Be Heard," was the first article she signed her real name after many years. Just a post on a small blog, but in a few weeks there were more than 300 shares. Some mothers sent letters, some just left a sun icon in the comments. Just that. And Claire felt enough. She wasn't seeking justice for anyone else. But if her truth could become a small light in the long hallway someone was going through, then it was worth it. As the sun shifted to the west, the book fair began to thin out. Claire stood at the counter, looking around. Emily was at the booth next door, helping a small child put storybooks into a basket. She was patient, slow, kneeling down at eye level with the little one, and pointing to each book. This one is about dinosaurs, and this one is about a lion that can sing. Claire didn't call, didn't interfere, just stood watching. The early spring wind blew lightly, making the girl's hair fly loosely in front of her forehead. But this time, Emily didn't lift it up with a fearful reflex. She let it loosen a little, then bowed her head, smiling. Claire felt herself holding her breath for a moment. Then from somewhere, her eyes began to well up. Not tears of pain, but the gentle feeling when someone sees something that has broken. Now, healed, not perfect, but enough to live on. On the way home, when passing through the small tree-lined street, Emily said, "I want to tell stories to my friends at school. Like Mom." "What story?" "The story of Snowflake being afraid of noise. But she learned how not to be scared anymore." Claire turned. "Will Snowflake be okay?" Emily nodded firmly. "She will be okay." She took her mother's hand. Small hands, warm, no longer wet with sweat like in the early days. Just a hand like any other child, growing up little by little. Claire looked at her, then looked up at the evening sky. The sun had tilted to the edge of the house across the street. Not too bright, but bright enough to know that tomorrow would still come. In her heart, she thought, we can't erase all the darkness. But if we hold hands and walk through at least, it can't swallow us anymore. This story is not only a mother's journey to protect her child, but also a reminder of the unseen trauma that leaves no scars, but can silence a child for life. What do you think about what happened in that house? If it were you, would you be calm enough to listen to every small sign? And if you were ever the child who just washed their hands for a long time at night, hoping someone would realize they were afraid, would you hope someone would come in? Thank you for staying until the last lines. If you are a father, a mother, or were a child who had to grow up in silence, are you okay? Do you still believe that light can slip through even the smallest cracks? Now take a deep breath, put your hand on your chest, where there is the gentlest but most intense instinct. Even if you have trembled in the dark, you still deserve to be safe. And if possible, become a listener, because sometimes just one listener is enough to save a whole childhood.